long time ago, in the age of fairy tales, there was an old king whose ancient court magician had recently died. In those times, no king or kingdom could last without magic, and so the king sent word to the four corners of his kingdom that auditions for a new court magician were to happen in 3 days' time, and that all able conjurers were to attend. After 3 days came and went, 3 conjurers arrived at the castle. The first was a man so fair that most would have taken him for a maiden. He was dressed in golden robes and rode in on a unicorn of all things. The second was a large giant of a man, with grey streaks in his black beard. He wore royal blue robes, and was mounted on a fearsome basilisk. The third was a plain young man, who was dingy, so dingy in fact, that he strongly resembled a swineherd. He wore a muddy robe of brown, and rode in on an ordinary run-of-the-mill donkey. The 3 sorcerers presented themselves to the king in his throne room, each taking a knee and waiting for the king to speak his will. The king motioned to a nearby knight and said, "Begin the first test." The 3 conjurers stood, and in front of them was placed a small table covered in purple velvet, and on that table were sat 3 cups made of glass. The king spoke again. "Turn these cups into great goblets, fit for a king." The conjurer in the golden robes went first. He took his wand in hand and tapped on one of the glasses, transforming it instantly into a great goblet of gold, inlaid with rubies that glowed like fire. The golden mage gave his goblet to the king proudly, and the king said, "Thank you. This is fit for a king." Then the second conjurer with robes of blue took his turn. He began shouting magical words and weaving his hands about, and when at last he was ready, he took a glass cup in hand and transformed it into a goblet entirely made of sapphire, with bands of silver wrapped around it, and the sapphire goblet glowed like light dancing in a riverbed. The blue mage gave his goblet to the king proudly, and the king said, "Thank you. This is fit for a king." Then it came time for the third conjurer to take his turn. The muddy conjurer with robes of brown stepped up to the table and began examining his cup. Then he raised his hand and said, "My king, I wish to make you a great goblet as well. But for my magic, I need 1 sugar cube, 1 bay leaf, and at least 2 more glasses, in addition to the one I have." The king granted his request, and the brown mage had all he needed to make his goblet. He said 1 magic word and tapped his cup with his wand, and all of the things that he had been given disappeared except for his cup, which transformed into a plain-looking glass goblet made of powdered glass. The brown mage humbly gave the goblet to the king, and the king asked, "Is there anything special about this goblet? For it looks very plain." The conjurer in brown responded, "Oh yes, my lord. Everything you drink from it will always taste fresh and sweet. Also, the goblet will never break, as ordinary glass would." The king shook his head. "I'm sorry, son, but your goblet is not fit for a king. But since it was made by magic still, I shall gift it to my daughter instead of throwing it out." The golden mage snickered to the blue mage. "Ha! What a crummy conjurer he turned out to be." And they laughed. The next day the king called the 3 sorcerers to his banquet hall to announce the second test. The princess sat to the left of the king's court, and she drank sweetly from her new glass goblet, and glanced at the brown-robed mage who made it. She then whispered something to her handmaiden and giggled. The young mage looked down, embarrassed, for he had never seen a maiden more beautiful than the princess. To the right of the king's court sat an empty chair made of white, petrified roots. It was clear that this chair was the seat of the court magician, which one of the 3 sorcerers would win at the end of these trials. The old king cleared his throat. Your second test is to summon a great and powerful beast that will aid me in protecting these lands we all call home. You have 1 whole day to finish this task, but remember, this beast must be fit for a king. The young conjurer, dressed in brown, as soon as he could, went out into nature, to the plains and fields and forests of the kingdom. He used his magic to find the fastest, strongest wild horse in the kingdom, and spent a whole day working his spells on the great steed, so that by the end of the day it was the most loyal, fearless, and tame mount in all the land. However, the conjurer knew that this beast, while great, was not magically powerful in the way that the king had expected, and so the young mage showed up to the courtyard of the king without his beast. And the king asked, "What have you made for me, conjurer? I hope it is impressive, for your competitors have already summoned their beasts. From the gold mage, a great dragon who lives in my pond. It only needs a loaf of bread a day to survive, and patrols my castle by flying around it. And from the blue mage, a powerful chimera who lives in the trees and patrols by running along my castle walls. He survives on just a few nuts a day. Both have already been found fit for a king." The dingy brown-robed conjurer looked at both beasts, smiled, and said, "My king, my beast shall be a finer thing than those 2 creatures. However, I shall need 1 more day to complete it." The king looked puzzled, then shrugged, and granted the brown mage 1 more day to finish his summoning. The young conjurer left at once and worked through the night so he could present his beast in the morning. When morning came, the king and the other 2 conjurers went down to the courtyard to see what he had made. They saw a white steed with mane that glowed and waved like the sun, whose hooves were ablaze with light flame. The conjurer walked the great and powerful mount to the king and said, "This is Sunrider, my lord." The king patted the beast gently and shook his head. "I am sorry, but this just looks like a glowing horse. I am sure it is well enchanted, but compared to the dragon, it's not fit for a king. Take it to my daughter's stables. It will make a fine gift." Before he could leave for the stable, he heard the blue mage say to the golden mage, "You are right, he is a crummy conjurer," and they laughed snidely. He took Sunrider to the stables, where to his surprise the princess was coming back from a ride. She got off her horse and ran over to the young sorcerer and asked excitedly, "Is that amazing creature mine? What's its name? What does he do? Can I ride it?" She beamed ear to ear. The young conjurer looked quite down and answered, "Yes, he is yours, princess. His name is Sunrider. He is enchanted to be twice as fast as any horse in the world, and draws his life force from the light of the sun, so he will never tire. I also trained him to be the most brave and loyal steed in the world, so ride him all you wish, for the king never will." The princess saw how upset the conjurer was, and asked what was wrong. "I am losing to shadows," he said. "Whatever do you mean, Sir Mage?" she asked. He replied kindly, with a weak smile, "The dragon is nothing more than a goose, the chimera a squirrel, and the 2 goblets are still 2 cups made of glass. My competitors have used no true magic. They have just tricked your father with illusions, just shadows." The princess's face turned red. She was furious. "If that is true, my father must be told at once," she yelled. "No, princess," said the conjurer, who spoke calmly. Having you on my side would be an unfair advantage. I am sure the king will see the truth for himself in time. I must rest now, so I will be ready for the next test." The princess kissed him on the cheek and said, "Good luck." The young conjurer blushed and went off to bed. The next day, the king announced the third and final test to the sorcerers in his throne room. "My magical friends, your final test to determine which of you is to become the new court magician is at hand. For your third and final trial, you must make for me a treasure, something that will truly enhance my life. You have 1 day. It must be fit for a king." That night, the brown mage found where the king kept his crown and enchanted it. "Fit for a king," he said. Then he went to bed, knowing his work was done. The next day, all 3 sorcerers arrived at the throne room. The conjurer in golden robes brought a small fancy chest, which he proudly presented to the king. The king took a look inside the chest, but instead of being happy, he looked confused. "Could you explain this to me, Sir Mage?" asked the king to the golden conjurer. "Oh yes, my lord, it is a chest which fills with infinite gold nuggets. My king, you shall be rich beyond imagining." The king looked cross for a moment and then smiled and said, "Thank you. It's your turn now, Blue Mage." The giant blue mage gave the king 2 treasures proudly. The king again did not look happy. "Could you help me understand, Sir Mage, these gifts?" The blue mage answered, "Of course, my king. Well, one is a scepter made of the night sky, and the other a robe made of rainbows." "I see. Thank you," responded the king. The king looked sternly at the brown mage. "Now, you, my lad, what have you for me?" The brown mage answered, "A crown enchanted to allow you to see through any falsehood brought on by magic." The young mage smiled. The king got up from his throne. "Today I have been given a chest full of river rocks, a riding crop, and an old bathrobe. Gold mage, blue mage, call out the beasts that you made for me." They did as they were told, for they were scared of the old king's wrath. "A goose, a squirrel, ha!" said the king. "Bring my goblets to me, brown mage," he ordered. Then he shattered the 2 fake goblets, for they were ordinary glass cups. He called to a nearby knight angrily, "Get these 2 crummy conjurers out of my castle now!" The gold and blue mage left as quickly as they came. The king took a moment to calm himself. He looked embarrassed. "Now, my son, your goblet which makes things taste sweet and fresh, your horse which burns like the sun, are they real?" asked the king. "They are, my lord," replied the brown mage. "Then you may take your seat on my right, for you are the new royal court magician." The dingy young man, who was used to living in the forest, cleaned himself up and put on the robes of the royal court magician. It turns out that under all that muck was a fairly handsome young man, after all. For the next time the princess saw him, she started to blush. A few years passed, and in that time the royal court mage proved himself to be a kind, thoughtful, and powerful sorcerer, who was every bit equal to his task. However, when the king grew sick, the mage was called into his chamber. "Is there anything you can do, Sir Mage?" asked the king. The conjurer responded, "No, my king. If I had 10 more years to work on it, I could get you to 200 or more, but as it stands, you won't see 68. You will die in 3 days' time. I am sorry." The king smiled, still so honest. The mage asked, "Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable?" The king cleared his throat. "Yes, my son. You can marry the princess and take my place as king and make her happy all her days." The court magician did as the king knew he would. He loved his new bride, the princess, now queen, and with kindness and diligence ruled his new kingdom as the great and powerful Conjuror King. And both lived happily evermore. The end. For now. This has been The Crummy Conjuror by Ezra D. Pendragon. If you'd like more stories like this, leave a like and comment, and I can read you more of the stories from this series. I'm glad that you took the time to be here with me today. Have a wonderful day.